the incredible scale and scope of that food resource and the number of organisms that come to feed on it, right? A dead squirrel in the road is, a vulture picks that off and, is done in 5 minutes. Whereas, scientists have documented 180 polar bears feeding at a single dead bowhead whale in Russia.
What's up, everybody? From Nautilus, I'm Brian Gallagher, and you're watching Behind the Scenes. Today, we're joined by Ben Goldfarb. Ben is an environmental journalist and author. His first book, Eager, The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter, won the 2019 Penn E.O. Wilson Award, and the Washington Post called it one of 2018's best books. Ben is currently writing another book about road ecology, the science of how human infrastructure affects nature. His writing has appeared in places like The Atlantic, National Geographic, The New York Times, The Guardian, and many others. Ben is joining us today to talk about his recent story in Nautilus titled Humans Are Overzealous Whale Morticians. We hastily dispose of dead whales, ignoring the ecological significance of their carcasses. Ben, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, do you want to give us a brief background on what sort of path you took to doing the kind of work you're up to now as a journalist and author?
Sure, that's a good question. I've always cared deeply about ecology, wildlife conservation, nature in general, and those are the sorts of stories that I tend to pursue. As you mentioned in your intro, I've been spending the last few years working primarily on a book about road ecology, all of the ways in which human infrastructure shapes the natural world, and what we can do to kind of mitigate those impacts to make our infrastructure a little less destructive. So I've been thinking a lot lately about dead animals and what we do with them, and that made the whale article especially timely for me.
Right. Yeah. Do you want to give our viewers a brief summary of that piece for those who haven't perhaps read it yet?
Sure. So when a whale dies in the ocean, most of those whales end up sinking to the ocean floor, but some small portion of them wash up on beaches, kind of buoyed by their internal gases and conveyed by currents. And historically, this giant source of carrion that washed up on our coastlines was this really important ecological driver. All kinds of creatures from condors to polar bears to wolves and grizzly bears really relied on this source of kind of coastal carrion, and all kinds of, for example, when California condors went extinct at the end of the Pleistocene, when everything else in North America, all of the giant megafauna, the ground sloths and the bear-sized beavers and the mammoths went extinct, condors nearly went extinct as well because they lost that source of meat, and they survived by kind of congregating on the California coast, eating dead whales, dolphins, and seals. So historically, this has been a really important source of protein for all kinds of creatures. But when we wiped out or virtually wiped out large whales during the era of industrial whaling, we destroyed that source of meat, which had really profound ecological consequences. So now whales are, or at least many populations of large whales are kind of bouncing back. So we're getting some of that carrion back on our shorelines. But the problem is that we tend to not let it remain in place, right? A whale is this big, stinky, kind of disgusting blob of blubber and fat and muscle and bone that smells terrible. So we tend to either drag them out to sea or usually landfill or incinerate or bury them, which is sort of makes sense from a kind of a public human well-being standpoint, right? Nobody wants a big stinky whale, on Miami Beach. But in removing that carcass from the environment, you're also removing this really valuable ecological, kind of load of food for all kinds of scavengers. So there's this group of scientists who are increasingly thinking about how we manage whale carcasses, what opportunities there are to kind of let them be carcasses in the environment, to let scavengers take advantage of them, and that's what this article is about. Is what should we be doing with dead whales and dolphins?
How long does it typically take for a whale carcass to be totally used up by the animals in that ecosystem that could benefit from it? Like, how long are people going to have to wait for a carcass to be gone?
Yeah, that's a good question. It kind of depends on the ecosystem. It depends on where the carcass is, right? If the carcass is above high tide line, it can last quite a long while. Whereas if it's in the surf, it's being kind of buffeted by waves, and sharks can get at it, so it kind of breaks down a little more quickly. But certainly it can take many months for a carcass to break down, and that's there's no wonder that people tend to want them gone.
Right. What were some of your first thoughts about how to go about reporting the story?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny. Like I said, I've been working this book about road ecology, right? So a lot of that book ends up being about how we handle carcasses, right? Or at least one chapter is really about that, and the fact that hey, all of the the deer and squirrels and raccoons and so on that we hit are this potential resource for some of the same animals that are using whale carcasses, right? Turkey vultures, coyotes, foxes, bears. So this was certainly already on my mind, and I've been thinking a lot about this kind of what some scientists have called an aseptic approach to carcass management. The idea that we want dead things gone from our environment. Whereas in reality, of course, historically, the dead bodies were this hugely important resource, right? So I've been thinking about this already, and kind of knew some of the folks in the carrion ecology world, and and called them up, and also was eager to talk to some of the folks who work for stranding networks around the United States. There are these really amazingly committed, passionate, brilliant people who respond to the strandings of dead whales and dolphins, and go kind of do forensic investigations of the carcass and then dispose of them. So I knew some of those folks through Twitter, and was eager to reach out to them. So like a journalist does, just sort of relying on my networks of sources from past reporting and social media.
What were some of the appealing aspects of writing and researching specifically about whale carcasses as opposed to the other sorts of dead animals we might find along our roadways and other more, how would you say, like more clear bits of human infrastructure, as opposed to a coastline, which is natural and it's there whether or not humans are around it?
Yeah, I just think that the scale of the coastal whale fall. Whale fall that's sort of the term for a whale that sinks to the bottom of the ocean and becomes food for shrimp and hagfish and sleeper sharks and all of these other kind of benthic organisms. Coastal whale fall would be, I guess, a whale that washed up on a beach. I think that's just unbelievable. Reading some historical accounts, and more recent papers, just the incredible scale and scope of that food resource and the number of organisms that come to feed on it, right? A dead squirrel on the road is, a vulture picks that off and, is done in 5 minutes. Whereas, scientists have documented 180 polar bears feeding at a single dead bowhead whale in Russia. There's a great anecdote in the story about a humpback that washed up in Glacier Bay National Park and fed wolves and grizzly bears for, I think, 4 or 5 months before it finally washed out to sea. And even when it washed out to sea, there was a grizzly bear riding it, desperate to keep this, this food resource around. So just the.
Oh man, I hope someone got a picture of that.
there's one little grainy picture. It's not quite as evocative as you'd like. So just the amazing scale of the resource that a whale provides is, there's really no terrestrial animal like it.
Of course. Can you share any interesting bits from your research or reporting that didn't make it into this final draft? Maybe some stuff that you're saving for your book, perhaps?
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, one bit of kind of road carrion ecology that I think about a lot, and I think that, I mean, ultimately this article is about, how can we let carcasses be carcasses, right? How can we, take these bodies that we're disposing of and keep them on the landscape, let them remain in the ecosystem. And I mean, one of the anecdotes in my road ecology book that I think about a lot involves golden eagles in the American West. And eagles, historically, like a lot of coastal animals, they were hugely dependent on carcasses, right? In winter, all of these deer and elk and antelope would die, and that was a really important winter food source for golden eagles. Now we've kind of simulated that for them with our highways, right? Which are where all the carcasses come from. We're killing all of these deer and elk that eagles then are able to feed on. But the problem, of course, is that when they when they swoop down to the highway, that's kind of an ecological trap, right? They go down to feed on a dead deer, and then they get, they fill up. They've got, a couple pounds of venison in their belly. It's hard for them to take off, and they get hit by cars. And another issue too is that the cars are kind of this constant disturbance, right? So instead of being able to just eat in peace for a couple of hours, they're constantly being kind of chased off. They're flushing all the time as the cars drive by. So they're not really, getting the full caloric benefit, right? They're burning a lot of calories, taking off and then landing and taking off and landing, right? So there's been some really cool research by a group called Hawkwatch, which basically suggests that, look, all you have to do is, take one of these dead deer or elk, and drag it just 40 feet or so away from the highway, and then eagles can feed, kind of unmolested by cars and with little risk of being hit, right? So you've taken this danger to them, and just by moving a carcass, turned it into this fantastic sort of environmental resource or benefit, and I think that's the same thing that we're trying to do with whales is, how can we let these carcasses be carcasses and, feed the animals that need to get fed by them. So, I'm just fascinated by this kind of global, both marine and terrestrial movement, to reconceive of carcasses as resources rather than blights on the landscape.
What do you think are some of the most effective or like best solutions for making sure that carcasses can provide those resources to other animals in the ecosystem so that they, like cars and such, don't pose a danger to them? Like if like you said, if someone can move the carcass away from the highway, does that mean there's some kind of alert system, some kind of surveillance that tips people off that here's a dead animal like right on the road?
Yeah, I mean that's mostly being done by like highway maintenance workers, the contractors and public employees. I think that thinking about whales, one interesting thing that that kind of surprised me. I didn't know anything about this prior to reporting this article. Was that so? Look, a lot of whales and dolphins wash up alive, and are kind of beyond saving and end up being euthanized. The kind of the chemical that's commonly used to euthanize cetaceans, whales, and dolphins is pentobarbital, which is the same thing that is used to put your dog or cat to sleep at the end of of her life, and that toxin can remain active in a carcass for a really long time, and there's one horrible story in particular of a dog in Australia who dug up a chunk of humpback whale blubber from a whale that had been euthanized, ate the blubber and fell into a 3-week long coma. And the dog ultimately survived. It was kind of this horrible example of of how toxic these bodies can be, right? So when we euthanize cetaceans, instead of letting them be a resource for animals, we're creating this toxic dump, essentially, that's really dangerous. So that was one surprising thing that I learned, was that a lot of mammalogists and wildlife veterinarians are thinking about different chemicals that can be used for euthanasia, to allow that carcass to be a carcass rather than a toxic dump site. So I think that's one thing that could be in really widespread practice potentially, is thinking more deliberately about how we're killing these animals when unfortunately we have to.
Do you want to tell our viewers where you might be at in your book writing process? When can we expect that to be out and able to read and enjoy?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that, Brian. It'll be out sometime in the 21st century. I think, hopefully, we're a couple of drafts deep now, and I think we're on track for either maybe fall of 2023 or early winter of 2024, something like that. So we're getting there. Thanks for asking.
Excellent. Do you want to tell our viewers where they can find you online, on Twitter, where they can see some of your work?
Sure. My Twitter handle is Ben_A_Goldfarb, and I'm definitely an active tweeter. Would love to connect with you there. And my personal website is www.bengoldfarb.com, and that has all of my work on it there, including this whale story that I so enjoyed writing.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ben, for talking about it.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Appreciate it.